right. Hello there, everyone. Looks like we have a pretty good crowd for today. Looks like a couple of people are still connecting to audio. I think that's the majority of people. I know a couple of people will continue to trickle in, but we will go ahead and get started because there is a lot to cover about pre-qualification. So hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name is Megan Miner, and if we haven't met before, I'm a consultant working with the Indiana Broadband Office on all things BEAD. We have several staff members from the Indiana Broadband Office on the call as well. And we're excited to tell you more about the pre-qualification process. So just a couple of notes before we get started. One, this meeting is being recorded. So the recording and the slides will both be posted online after the webinar is complete. We do have another webinar scheduled for Thursday, I believe, and you do not have to attend both. It's going to be the same content besides the questions at the end from the audience. So don't feel like you have to attend both if you don't want to, but we will post both of those recordings just in case. And then on the topic of questions, feel free to ask questions in the chat as we go along, just to keep track of your thoughts. We will circle back to those questions at the end and make sure that they all get answered. And then there will also be a time where you can come off of mute if you'd like to at the end as well to ask some questions. So feel free to take note of those throughout the meeting. All right. So just starting with our agenda, this is where we're headed for the day. We're going to do a brief overview and timeline about pre-qualification and everything that's coming up next. We'll go through everything you need to know about accessing the actual portal for pre-qualification, the registration process. We'll go through all of the sections of pre-qualification, how you review and submit, the revisions process, and then again, just a review of your next steps and the resources that are available to you throughout pre-qualification. So really, the goal of pre-qualification is to ensure that all of our prospective applicants meet the minimum subgrantee requirements that are set forth by the NTIA. This is our first step as we move towards BEAD subgrantee selection, and we're really excited about it, but we do need to make sure that all participants have a minimum level of technical expertise, financial stability, those kinds of requirements. A couple of reminders about the pre-qualification process that you may have seen in volume 2, but it's a little bit of a good reminder since it's been a little bit since you may have seen that. First, you have to complete pre-qualification, even if you aren't sure necessarily at this point that you want to participate in BEAD subgrantee selection, or even if you want to only participate in the later rounds of BEAD subgrantee selection. This is the only time that pre-qualification will happen. So if you're on the fence or think you might participate in later rounds, you still need to get pre-qualified and participate when we open pre-qualification. You won't have another chance of again. We did choose to do this single round of pre-qualification to avoid providers having to resubmit the same documentation during every single subgrantee selection round. So that's why it is structured this way. But one caveat with that, pre-qualification is non-binding. So even if you go through the pre-qualification process, you get pre-qualified, you submit all of your documentation, that does not mean that you have to participate in subgrantee selection. You can go through pre-qualification and then decide that BEAD is not right for your organization. And if so, no harm, no foul. It is totally non-binding to participate in pre-qualification. Just make sure that you do submit your materials on time if you think you'll be participating or if there's any chance you will be participating. Jumping to the timeline, this is what we're looking at right now, just to give you a sense of BEAD overall and how pre-qualification falls into it. So we've recently wrapped up our challenge process, which was effectively March through July for each of the phases. And so now we're moving into that pre-qualification. As you'll see throughout, I want to emphasize that pre-qualification starts on August 26th, and that's going to run through September 27th. So that is your time to get all of your materials submitted for this process. After subgrantee pre-qualification ends, we will then be posting a list of round one eligible addresses. At this point, we can't give you an exact date about when those will be posted because it's very dependent on when our challenge process results are approved by the NTIA. We are not sure when that will be. States have had very different experiences in terms of actually getting those approved and finalized, but we can't move into subgrantee selection until that happens. I can tell you that as soon as we get that approval from the NTIA, we will be posting that. So you all will be, the first to know once we find out that that's actually been approved. Then we are approximating that mid-October is when we will actually be able to begin our first round of subgrantee selection. Again, this is an estimate. That's also going to be pretty highly dependent on when those challenge process results are approved by the NTIA. We want to give you adequate time to build out your project areas for round one. So addresses will be posted, of course, before the round opens for some period of time. And then that first round will also have the longest submission window as well, so that you can prepare those. So just so you see where we're going, pre-qualification is really this first step to move into subgrantee selection, which we will do as quickly as we can once we get the proper approvals. So specifically on the pre-qualification portal, the portal is the same portal that you're familiar with from the challenge process. It's that ready.net portal. It'll be used for pre-qualification and all rounds of subgrantee selection. All of your materials will need to be submitted through this portal. It's quite user-friendly. I think you'll be pleased, even if you used it for the challenge process. I think the pre-qualification flow is quite nice as you move through it and easy to understand. One thing I do want to emphasize is that the pre-qualification portal, even for registration, is not open yet. So it will open on August 26th at 9 a.m., but that will be the first time that you can access it. It's going to be accessible from the same link that you're familiar with, apply.connectingindiana.com. Yes, the same places you have saved, that's where you will go for pre-qualification. One thing to note for registration specifically is that all organizations are going to have to re-register to participate in pre-qualification. So even if you registered for the challenge process, you will not be able to use that previous registration to access the pre-qualification portal. During the challenge process, there were some data collection issues, and we need additional data about each organization and really need to make sure that we have the correct primary contact for all of those organizations. So a re-register for everyone is just the easiest way to accomplish this. So you won't be able to just sign in with that same email address on the first day that things opened. You can use that same email address to re-register, but you will have to go through that registration process again. What that's going to look like, it's going to be the exact same as the challenge process. It'll be on that main connectingindiana.com page. It will say register now. You will click on that. Please have the primary contact for your organization do that initial registration. It's just easier for everyone involved to make sure that we're contacting the right person about anything at all related to pre-qualification if they are actually the individual that sets up the registration for your organization. Just like in the challenge process, once your organization has been approved, you can add multiple users to your same organization. You can all work simultaneously, and we'll show you some of the features that are really nice for that as we get further into the webinar. But just for that initial registration, just one per organization. That registration, as I mentioned, will be accessible starting August 26th at 9 a.m. The initial registration does go through an approval process. At this point, only internet service providers are eligible to register for pre-qualification. So we'll just make sure that you have the right information and are the right organization type, but those registrations will be turned around quite quickly within one business day. You'll receive an email as soon as your organization has been approved, and then you will have access to the portal right away. On the next slide here, I have all of the registration information that you will need. This probably looks quite similar to you to the challenge process. Really, the only addition to this is making sure that you have your Indiana bidder registration number. And if you don't have one yet, you can start the registration process. And then please make sure that when you enter your FCC registration number that you are submitting the proper number. That is something that we really need as we move into subgrantee selection. So please make sure that that number is correct when you submit it. So that is the registration process, just to get into the portal. Again, pretty basic overall. To do so, starting August 26th, I would get in there and get registered as soon as you can, so that you can start looking at exactly what things look like within the portal. So now we're going to move into what the actual application looks like and going through each of the individual sections. So again, this is going to look very similar to what you see in the challenge process. So everything that is in this slide deck is just an example in the test environment. So this environment is not live for users yet, but this is what your main dashboard is going to look like when you log in for pre-qualification. If you're the first person on your team, you'll be able to see there that you just have one teammate, but you'll also be able to track as you go how many applications you have in progress, which will show you if potentially multiple people within your organization have started an application and you need to consolidate. And then you'll also be able to see there the number of applications that have actually been submitted, which should just be one per organization. I mentioned that you can have multiple users under the same organization. It's quite easy to do that. You'll just click on that invite teammates button on the main page. It'll a pop-up will come up and you just have to fill in the first and last name and the email address. That will prompt an email to that individual, and then they should be able to click on a link in that email and join your organization. You can work on applications simultaneously and you can skip around within the application. So if within the different sections you have different experts that need to be uploading their documentation, that is certainly possible with how this portal is set up. And then to actually access the pre-qualification application, there are two ways to do that. From the main page, you can just click the start button to get there, or on the left-hand side under apply for BEAD, you'll click that caret and expand, and it will show you pre-qualification. So those are the two ways that you can actually access that pre-qualification application. Then within the application itself, just want to show you a couple of pieces of functionality that are nice before we jump into the actual sections and the content of the application. So first, you'll be able to see that your progress is shown across the top of the screen. So anything that has a green checkbox across the top will show any sections that you have actually completed all of the required questions. If you click those three dots that are just to the right of labor laws and protection, it will expand and show you the rest of the sections that are available. So just note that they don't all show at once across the top of the screen. In terms of navigation, you do have some options within the portal. You can use the back and next buttons if you'd like to go between the different sections sequentially, but you can also use those sections at the top to jump between sections. You can click on any of those, even if you haven't completed the previous ones. And so you can kind of go through however you like as you finish any of the requirements. This also allows, again, separate users to go through and click on whichever section they actually need to fill out. And then one more, of course, there is a save application button at the bottom. I would suggest using this as often as you can, just to make sure that everything is saved appropriately. Whenever you upload a document, whenever you finish a section, just use that save application button. That's also what's going to allow multiple users to work within the same application effectively. So if you have more than one person in there at the same time, certainly save as much as you can to make sure that folks are not overwriting each other as they work through things. All right, so as you can see, just moving through the application itself is pretty straightforward. You'll move through a whole series of screens that will prompt you for each of the sections and tell you, exactly what you need to do. You'll see a couple of different kinds of questions, which you can see on this screen. There are many items that are yes, no, or a certification yes, no. Or multiple choice in this way. And then the other thing that you'll see are upload boxes. Anywhere that there is an upload, you can upload one document or you can upload multiple documents. So don't feel like you need to combine everything for a single question into a single PDF. If it's multiple documents, you can upload multiple, and that's totally fine in most cases. All right, at this point, we are now going to jump into the actual sections and requirements for pre-qualification that you'll need to prepare ahead of submitting. So this is going to look very similar to some of the guidance that we've put out. But of course, if you have questions throughout, certainly put them in the chat and we'll make sure that we circle back to them. So the first section that you're going to encounter in pre-qualification is the financial section. And I do want to make a really important point, especially about this section. So first, in many of the sections, there are subsections or multiple questions within it. So just make sure that you're scrolling down all the way and making sure that you hit all of the questions within a single section. The first in the financial section is the letter of credit certification. So this is a change. We've pushed out a few emails about this as well as new pre-qualification guidance, but I want to bring it to everyone's attention on the call as well. So previously, in our approved version of Volume 2, we said that all prospective subgrantees would need to submit a letter of credit or their letter of credit waiver documentation, which would be like a letter of credit from a credit union or a letter committing to issue a performance bond. We said previously that those letters would actually need to be submitted during pre-qualification itself. Now, we first wrote those requirements, I think back in December or earlier of 2023, and our understanding of what exactly BEAD is going to look like and how the timing has actually come to fruition has changed pretty significantly. And so now we know that it makes more sense to actually get that letter of credit or that letter of commitment to issue a performance bond during the rounds of subgrantee selection. So during pre-qualification, uploading that documentation is no longer required. So we have actually submitted an amendment, a very short amendment to our Volume 2 to account for this. And we're proceeding with that and have gotten permission from NTIA to do so. And you will see now in the pre-qualification guidance as well, that has been updated to reflect this change. So again, you will not need to upload that documentation during pre-qualification. That will come during each round of subgrantee selection. Instead, during pre-qualification, you will just have to do a checkbox, kind of yes, no, certifying that you understand those requirements and that you will upload the appropriate documentation when it comes time during the selection rounds. So I think that will be a welcome change for many of the people on the call. And we're happy that that is going to be that way. The second piece of the financial section are the financial statements. So this is a requirement for applicants to upload audited financial statements from the prior fiscal year. So this is a document upload. You do have an option if you do not have audited financial statements at this time to upload unaudited financial statements. However, you will have to commit to uploading audited statements by the end of September, and that must be completed before you could be awarded anything during subgrantee selection. So kind of two options there. And then if you go the unaudited financial statements route, we will have to circle back to that and make sure that we get the documentation at a later time. So that is the financial section. The next section you'll see is managerial, and just have a screenshot of this to show you a couple more features within the platform that I think are really nice. So first, for basically every question, we've cited where exactly to find additional details, both within the initial proposal Volume 2 and within the BEAD NOFO. So that's almost always going to be under the question itself, as well as a link to the BEAD NOFO, so that if you have questions, you can quickly access that if you need clarification. The other thing I wanted to point out is that a lot of times there are also instructions on the right-hand side of the screen. Those can sometimes include additional links as well. And if there are multiple questions, you will need to click on that instructions icon for each question to get it to pop up on the right-hand side after the first question. So just pointing out that there is some additional functionality there if you need clarification while you're actually moving through these sections. This slide just lays out what the actual requirements are for the managerial section of the application. really three parts. The first two are on the left-hand side of the screen. Those are resumes and organizational charts. So you'll be required to upload resumes for key management personnel in your organization. The point of these resumes is to show that you have adequate managerial capacity and experience to successfully implement some of these BEAD deployments. So being able to show that experience and those skills through those resumes. And then organizational charts as well. Just need to explain any relationship between parents, subsidiaries, and affiliates that might be involved here. And then the third piece is on the right-hand side of the screen. That is the readiness narrative. Really what you're doing here is writing a narrative that shows how your organization is ready to manage BEAD deployment and then the ongoing broadband services network. So some of these do not have a specific format. There's no specific way that you need to submit this. But we've included here some items for you to consider including. So detailing your experience on projects or deployments of similar size, that's particularly compelling. If you've acquired new skills for your organization that really set you up for success with BEAD, that's really helpful. Or if you have any internal policies that you think will make sure that you can deploy effectively, those are all important things to point out as we go through this readiness narrative. All right, the next section we have are compliance with laws. So again, on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see certifications. These are both, nothing needs to be uploaded or written. Those are just a certification via a yes/no checkbox that you will have to complete. There are several of those throughout this application, as you'll see. On the right-hand side, this is where you're going to get into a legal opinion. This is a document that you will have to upload into the portal. The point of this document is to lay out your ability to carry out BEAD deployment and the ongoing network competently and in compliance with any applicable laws. Again, this is a document that can take many formats depending on the information that you want to share or what you think sets your organization up for success. But there are two things that must be included. The first one is details on any past violations or pending court proceedings where you have not complied with applicable laws. You do have to disclose that in this particular narrative. And then the second piece is identifying the key management personnel who will be responsible for all aspects of legal compliance. So those are the two required pieces of this narrative. And then beyond that, again, you have some freedom to format this in a way that makes sense for you. Again, if you have organizational processes or procedures or trainings that will ensure compliance across your organization, those are details that you can also include in this narrative as evidence. The next piece is operational capability. So all organizations are going to answer the top 3 questions for operational capability. So the number of years your organization has provided internet service, the number of years providing internet service within Indiana, and then the current number of subscribers in Indiana. So everyone will answer those 3. And then after that, applicants will select an organization type option that most closely aligns with them. And then you'll be offered different questions depending on what your selection is. We're expecting that in most cases, we're really going to see a lot of those first 2 options. So organizations that have provided voice or broadband service for at least 2 consecutive years, or subsidiaries of parent companies that have done so. The other options are organizations that have provided electronic transmission distribution services previously, and then new entrants as well. The next slide here is just going through what the requirements will be depending on what selection you make on the first screen. So again, for those top 2, any organizations or subsidiaries of a company that have provided voice or broadband service for at least 2 consecutive years, you're going to certify that you've submitted timely FCC data and other submissions. And if not, you'll have to explain why there's not compliance there. And then if you are a subsidiary of a parent company, you'll have to submit some extra documentation just detailing your parent company's experience and number of years in service. Again, we're expecting that those are going to be the most common that we're seeing. If you do happen to be a new entrant with less than 2 years providing voice or broadband service, this is where you will upload pretty robust documentation showing that your newly formed entity actually has the sufficient operational capability to perform a BEAD deployment on this scale. So you'll really want to look into those requirements in the BEAD NOFO if you happen to fall into that category. The next section is the ownership information. So this is an NTIA requirement. All prospective subgrantees will have to upload documentation that's detailed disclosure of ownership, has to abide by 47 CFR 1.2112. We've linked here directly to those requirements so that you can make sure that you hit all of those. This may include written documentation. It may include kind of ownership charts showing stakeholders. Whatever makes sense for your organization within these requirements is what you'll need to submit. Again, you can submit one or multiple documents to fulfill this ownership section. All right, we only have 2 more large sections left to go through, and then we'll get to many of the certifications. So the next one is specifically around labor laws and protection. And these are really important because they are actually included in your subgrantee selection scoring. So there are 2 components to this. One is about past compliance on federal labor and employment laws, and one is about future compliance. So on the left-hand side, they're talking about past compliance. You will have to disclose your compliance from the last 3 years with federal labor and employment laws, and any instances where you, contractors or subcontractors, have been found to have violated those laws. That is one piece of scoring actually in our subgrantee selection process. So your answer from this question will follow you into the subgrantee selection rounds. So that's 5 points in our scoring matrix around not having any of those violations. If you do not have any of those violations in the preceding 3 years, then you receive those 5 points. In this documentation as well, you will need to have a written certification from an officer or director level showing evidence of past compliance for your organization, your contractors, and your subcontractors. So a bit of a narrative about that past compliance and a certification that has been so. The second piece, which will also follow you into subgrantee selection scoring, again, is 5 points. This is where you will upload one or several documents that detail your plans to continue to be in compliance with federal labor and employment laws throughout all of the BEAD deployment and your projects. So there is a list here of the kinds of things that your documentation should include. Please make sure that you address all of these points in your narrative, because that is what is actually going to get your score during subgrantee selection. Again, this is another 5 points, so 10 points total coming from these 2 answers. We want to make sure that you have a really robust answer here about future compliance and what that will look like. And if you happen to be a new entrant to the market, this future compliance, you will need to make really specific forward-looking promises about how you will stay in compliance, since you do not have a past compliance record to point to. All right, and then finally, before we get into the certification questions, we will gather information about other public funding. So this is where you will upload information about any other current broadband deployments, projects you have submitted as application but have not heard back on, or plan to submit as application using public funds. So anything that is using ARPA dollars, you'll need to include here: RDOF, Next Level Connections, Indiana Connectivity Program, any of those deployments that you are currently doing in the state of Indiana. So if you have ones in other states, those do not need to be disclosed here, but anything that's taking place in Indiana does. And for each of those projects, you will need to submit the information that's listed here. It's pretty basic information for each of these. Again, this is a place where you can upload multiple documents, but please be sure to include all of the projects using public funds that you are currently undertaking in the state of Indiana. All right, so that is the last large upload section of the pre-qualification application. After this, you will move into several screens that are just a kind of checkbox certification. So the first of those is Build America, Buy America. Here you are certifying that you have read, understand, and agree to all of the programmatic Build America, Buy America requirements. This does include if the Build America, Buy America waiver from the NTIA would apply to you. This is just noting everything programmatically related to BEAD and these requirements. I've provided you some links to the right-hand side here if you would like to reference those before you do the certification. This is NTIA's documentation around these requirements, as well as where the waiver applies. So certainly take a look at these resources before you move through those certifications. The next is environmental and historic preservation. This is very similar. You're certifying that you have read, understand, and agree to abide by all of those programmatic requirements. And then again, here have linked to the NTIA resources on this particular topic before you do that certification. But nothing to upload here, nothing to do yet, just certifying that you will abide by those requirements. All right, then we move into the cybersecurity certification. This is also a checkbox, but this is specifically around having a cybersecurity risk management plan that is either currently operational or could be upon providing service. It has to, reflect a lot of standards, this NIST framework. This is laid out quite clearly in the BEAD NOFO. It's a certification for now. You are given the option in the portal that if you already have a cybersecurity plan that abides by all of these requirements, you can go ahead and upload it and cross it off your list, but it is not required during pre-qualification. All that is required during pre-qualification is that checkbox certification. So you can upload it if you like. If not, you can do it during the actual rounds of subgrantee selection. And then it is the same for this next section, which is about supply chain risk management. This is, of course, about having a supply chain risk management plan in place that is, again, compliant with all of the NTIA requirements. You will just do a checkbox certification here. You, again, have the opportunity to upload that risk management plan if you already have it available to you. Otherwise, you can do so during the subgrantee selection rounds. And then the final piece of the pre-qualification application is the low-cost plan certification. So this is an NTIA required certification for all subgrantees that they will participate in ACP or any successor program that comes about to ACP, or in the absence of ACP or a successor program, will adopt the low-cost plan that's outlined in our initial proposal, volume 2. So again, on this slide, under the resources, we've linked directly to our volume 2 and given you the page numbers if you need to refresh yourself about what exactly that low cost plan is. But again, just a certification that has to be completed. That is the section of the actual application. Once everything is completed in all of those sections, which I know is a lot of information, you will get to a final screen that allows you to review everything that you have submitted. You'll be able to see all of the uploaded documents, all of the certifications you have done, all of the multi-select questions, everything is there. So you can review your answers and go back to any questions quite easily if you need to edit any of them. The other thing that's also really helpful is that at this time, you can download a PDF of your answers before you submit. So make sure that you do that if you would like to refer back to what exactly your responses were. After that, you will click that Submit Pre-Qualification button down at the bottom, and then you will have a final attestation, really just saying that you have the legal authority to submit the application on behalf of the organization, and then also that all of the information within the pre-qualification application is true and correct. This is the final step. Please make sure that you do this final attestation. It'll be a pop-up, but you are not actually submitted until you do this attestation and click submit. So just make sure you go through that additional step. After these applications start to be submitted, the IBO will begin reviewing these on a rolling basis throughout and after the pre-qualification window. So I would say as soon as you can get your documentation in, that's great. We know that these tend to come at the end of that time frame. So we recognize that, but we will be reviewing these on a rolling basis. So if you want kind of early feedback on any revisions that you might need, go ahead and submit your documentation early. So basically what will happen during the review process is that reviewers will make note of any revisions that are needed. They'll review every single section of the application, all of the documentation that's been uploaded, and make sure that it reaches the NTIA minimum standards for prospective subgrantees. You will receive all of your revision notes at once. So when you get an actual revision email to go check in for any of your revision notes in the portal, that will be everything. So you won't receive them piecemeal. That'll be all at once so that you can address those kind of in one fell swoop. You'll be notified via email, and then all of your users will be notified, and then anyone can log into the portal and actually see what those revision comments are and what needs to be changed. Important to note that applicants will have 5 calendar days to revise their application once notified. So make sure that you're staying on top of those emails that come from ready.net for that notification, and that you're ready to go for revisions, because it's a quick turnaround for the pre-qualification process. And then couple of last things here. We'll post these slides as well, which is why we have several links in them. These are going to be your top resources for most things related to pre-qualification. All of this is outlined in our volume 2, and we've given you the specific page numbers as well, just for quick reference. If you just want to zoom in on all things pre-qualification, those are the page numbers that you need to look at. And then we also have a pre-qualification guide. It gives all of this information about how to register in the portal, what the sections are. We also are updating this pre-qualification guide as we get new information. If there are any questions that we think need to be added after these webinars that come up, we'll make sure that the pre-qualification guide is updated, and we'll let people know as well when a new version of that is out. But that's going to be a great resource for you as well. And then just a couple more things to note. We did not think that office hours were necessarily as conducive for pre-qualification, since sometimes it's sensitive information that we're discussing related to this application. So we do have several time slots that are open for one-on-one individual meetings between an organization and the IBO. There is a link to request one of those 20-minute meeting slots. You should be able to see that in some of the emails that have gone out from the IBO, as well as in these slides. And then if none of those time slots work for you as well, you can always reach out to us, and I'm sure that we can find something that works. And then in between those meetings, of course, the Indiana Broadband Office is always reachable at that email address there, indianabroadband@iot.in.gov. And then I will just leave you with a reminder on the timeline, which is that pre-qualification will open on August 26th. So be ready for that and start getting all of the documentation together. With that, I think I am going to stop sharing my screen and we can jump into questions.
Thanks,
Maddie. If you want to read some of the ones from the chat first, that'd be great.
Yep, certainly. So we addressed a couple of these in the chat, but just for anybody that may have missed, we had one pop up in regards to when audited financial documentation was going to be due. So there was just, I think, a slip of the tongue. The slide said they are due end of November. I think it was said September. The November month is correct. So address that in the chat, but just for anybody that might have missed it. Then the next question we had was, are there sample legal opinion letters we can give to our attorney? Other grants have had these available. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sorry about that. It froze for me.
Oh,
Oh,
that's okay.
sorry.
Let me
Okay.
repeat. So the question was, are there sample legal opinion letters we can give our attorney? Other grants have had these available.
There is not currently a sample opinion letter right now. That is something that we can discuss internally, or Steve, if you'd like to comment on that. But it is not something as a template that we have currently available.
Yeah, I'll double down on that. As it stands right now, we do not have a template available. We've discussed that a little bit internally. We'll get back to everybody on that one. Hopefully, maybe by Thursday's webinar, we'll have an answer for that.
Perfect.
Great. The next question was that, is there a particular person or group that I could reach out to with respect to applying as a consortium? I wish to ensure we make it easy as we can on you and your team to ensure we provide any and all information.
I would say applying as a consortium, that is something that is certainly doable for BEAD and is allowed. If you want to set up some one-on-one time with the IBO team, we can talk about what that might look like, but really you have some flexibility in terms of kind of who's the main applicant and what that looks like. So maybe a separate meeting would be good to cover that.
And then we had a couple of people just reaching out to make sure that everything was recorded and would be posted. And the answer is yes, we will be posting the slides, posting the recording of the webinar on the IBO website. Those are all the questions that I have for you from the chat. If there's anybody else that has questions, please feel free to enter those into the chat. And if not, then I think we're okay. Oh, one came in. Do you know when the addresses available will be published? Go ahead.
That is the, I guess, $868 million question, to be honest. We do not know when our eligible address list is going to be available. As we finished the challenge process, we had to produce some very specific files and data analysis for the NTIA to submit our challenge process results. Then after that submission, it is with NTIA, and we don't really have a ton of look into how long that is going to take or when that approval might come. We do know that there are several states that are in a similar place in the process as we are, so also submitting their challenge process results. So it can take some more time based on having to review multiple states. But we don't really know. We're a little bit at the mercy of when the approval comes, but as soon as it does, we will of course let everyone know and make sure that that address list is public. I think we're, I don't know, tentatively hopeful that it comes within mid to late September. But again, that I really can't emphasize it enough that that's a bit of a guess, just based on what we've heard from other states. So we're not 100% sure.
Megan, if I could also add to this, I just want to remind everybody that the pre-qualification process is completely separate from the address list piece. So as we do get that approval from NTIA in terms of our address list, we will be not only posting it, we will be alerting everybody via the newsletter, etc., distribution lists. We will be screaming that from the rooftops. So I want to make sure that everybody realizes we will not be waiting for the end of the pre-certification process or anything along those lines. As soon as we have the approval from NTIA, everybody will have access to that address list as quickly as possible. We will make it very well known.
Thanks,
And then
Steve.
a quick clarification as well, because I think it might have been confusing in the slide deck, just talking about pre-qualification in general. As a note, so when you first are going to register, that will be on connectingindiana.com. You'll need to click that register now button. Any other time after you're registered and you're trying to get into the portal, that's going to be the same link as the challenge process, the apply.connectingindiana.com. So I know I had both of those URLs in the slide deck, wanted to make sure that I offered that clarification. So Connecting Indiana for registration, and then the rest of the time will be that apply.connectingindiana.
Thanks for that, Megan. We have a couple more questions that have been shuffling in. So firstly, after the official list of addresses are released, how long will providers have before the first subgrantee round will open?
That's a good question. Again, that is going to be a little bit dependent upon when we get that approval from NTIA. If we get it very early and very quickly, that might be up for several weeks before we move into subgrantee selection. But if it takes quite a long time to get that approval, we do have to get things moving with our subgrantee selection process, because we have a year window from the time that our volume 2 was approved to get through all of subgrantee selection and submit our final proposal to the NTIA. Right now, we are hoping that we will have about 3-ish weeks between when that list is posted and when our subgrantee selection round would begin. But again, that's going to depend a little bit upon the approval. I will say the first subgrantee selection round will be the longest. I think we have that in our volume 2 as 45 days. So that is, a month and a half to prepare materials just for the time that round is open based on that address list.
Thank you. Next question. In previous fundings, there have been challenges made, but then later others have still received funding in the areas challenged. Will there be a checks and balances to ensure funding hasn't already been received in the areas that have been identified for BEAD funding?
So I think this is a bit of a two-pronged question. So there may be locations, if we're just talking purely about challenges, not all challenges were accepted. And we also had a rebuttal phase. So just looking at it at face value, there will certainly be locations that received challenges during the challenge process that do not end up eligible for BEAD. And that could be just because of the level of evidence submitted in the challenge or the rebuttal. However, I think the second piece of that question is talking about areas that have already received funding. And so I'll talk a little bit about how we safeguard against duplicative funding. So before the challenge process began, we did a full deduplication using federal enforceable commitments and state and local enforceable commitments to show that we already knew that all of those locations were funded. You could actually see that within the challenge portal. It was indicated any location that we already knew about, it was indicated with a specific colored dot. And when you clicked on it, it gave you information about that enforceable commitment. Then we had the opportunity for challengers to submit enforceable commitment data throughout the challenge process. So if there were any locations that were missed for any reason at all, that could be submitted during the challenge process. And then again, as a third check, as part of the submission to NTIA, we actually have to do another deduplication using all of the new federal enforceable commitment data, as well as any state and local enforceable commitments that were awarded since the start of the challenge process. So that included Next Level Connections Round 4 that was awarded after our challenge process start date, the most recent rounds of the Indiana Connectivity Program, several local ARPA projects that were awarded. All of that was deduplicated again from our challenge process results. The other thing that I can tell you is that as we move through our subgrantee selection, if there are any new federal enforceable commitments that we learn about or any others that we may have missed, we can deduplicate those again in between our rounds of subgrantee selection. So there are several checks along the way to make sure that we are not funding any locations that have already received public funds for broadband deployment.
Thanks for that one too, Megan. Next, is the IBO anticipating approving or denying all pre-qualifying applicants prior to opening the first subgrantee selection round?
So it would be our hope to move through all of those applications in review before opening that first subgrantee selection round. That would be the goal. However, I would say, depending on how long it takes in the revision process, if that becomes long and drawn out, that would be a situation potentially in which an applicant may not be pre-qualified, depending on, you know, all of the dates of when that actual subgrantee selection would start. But that would really be the only situation. And we hope that that is not a situation that ends up coming to fruition on this.
Next, will there be a true-up period of the addresses for any addresses now served since the address availability was pulled at a previous fixed date?
So
Nothing, go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say I can have Steve jump into this one as well, but the Indiana Broadband Office will not be undertaking a true up. So that was something that was optional from the NTIA after the challenge process, and we are not undertaking that true up analysis, just the additional round of deduplication after our challenge process results. Steve, I'm not sure if there are any additional comments you wanted to add on that.
Yeah, all I'll say to that is that there are pros and cons to true up associated with it. We did some analysis on that and opted to not true up. As Megan just went through all of the different scenarios associated with both enforceable commitments and our office's need to deconflict and deduplicate funding sources from different programs and everything. We feel pretty comfortable with where our map is. There will continue to be deconfliction ongoing, as Megan just mentioned. The downside associated with all of this is a dynamic piece to this whole program, in that there will constantly be changes happening to the map throughout the process. I mean, into the future. So at some point in time, we had to cut it off and just say, hey, this is the one we're going with. So that's what the office determined based on our needs at the time, and we're moving forward that way.
Thank you for that too, Steve. The next question is, do you know how many rounds of funding there will be? Also, is the RDOF money that was left over added to this pot for BEAD, or did that go elsewhere?
So on the first part of that question for rounds of funding, we have written into our volume 2 that we will do 3 rounds of subgrantee selection for BEAD. The first we're hoping is kind of the most robust in terms of participation and coverage of the state. That is where internet service providers can create their own project areas made out of census blocks and committing to serve all of the unserved and underserved locations within that single census block or group of census blocks. The other 2 rounds we are hoping will be a bit more of a cleanup effort, getting to any locations that did not get bids in the first round, and that will be a bit more of a collaborative effort between the Indiana Broadband Office and the internet service providers, determining where project areas can be and making sure that we really get 100% coverage across the state for all unserved and underserved locations. In terms of your RDOF question, that was not added to the pot of money for BEAD, but I am not sure. I'm not particularly knowledgeable about the RDOF funding or if that went anywhere else.
I can add something to this. There have been a lot of questions about the RDOF money specific to the defaults that have happened over the last year or two. In the RDOF program, to my knowledge, that money has gone back to the NTIA, but was not part of the infrastructure law that was passed by Congress back in late 2021. which encompasses all of the money associated with the BEAD program and the digital equity programs. So RDOF is a completely separate program, divorced from BEAD and digital equity. And so there is no, I don't believe there's a pathway for the federal government to add the RDOF money to the BEAD program. There has, however, been some conversation, I know, by Congress in terms of what to do with the money that has been left over due to RDOF defaults. I don't believe that has come to resolution yet, and I'm sure there will be a lot of conversation moving forward about what they want to do with that money.
Great. Next question. This question is in regards to version 2 of the pre-qualification guide, and it's surrounding the letter of credit commitment. And the question is whether or not a letter of credit commitment is no longer required at the pre-qualification stage.
So that is correct. That is a change from the first version of the pre-qualification guidance. I just saw in chat, and I do want to hit on this in case anyone came in late, because this is a very, very important point. So thank you for asking the question. Yes, this is something that the IBO has changed. Having that letter of credit or that performance bond letter is no longer required during pre-qualification. All you'll need during pre-qualification is to certify that you understand the requirements and will get the appropriate documentation. You will not have to upload your letter of credit or performance bond letter until the actual rounds of subgrantee selection.
And I think we have one more question that I've seen so far before we're caught up. The question is, during the pre-qualification process, will it include areas that might be weak in scoring? As you look toward first round applications, this would let us provide the IBO with at least better applications for the unserved and underserved areas.
I want to make sure that I am answering the question that you want answered. So let me know if for any reason I'm not hitting on what it is. Happy to change and clarify. I'm reading that as maybe justifying any areas where your application for BEAD may look weak. Certainly, there are certain areas across pre-qualification that are narrative based, and if you think there's anything that you want to explain in those narratives that would help us understand why you're qualified for BEAD and how you can execute well and serve those unserved and underserved areas, certainly there is a lot of flexibility in many of the narrative sections about what you actually have to upload. There are a few requirements, but otherwise you have a lot of freedom to do what's best for your organization and give the best examples. So certainly feel free to add any information that might help us there.
I think that brings us to caught up on questions.
And I think we are right about at time as well. So if you do have any other follow-up questions, certainly feel free to go to the link and schedule a time for a one-on-one meeting or email the Indiana Broadband Office. I did just see another question come in via chat, and I can answer that one quickly because it's a pretty easy one, which is if there are defaulted areas like what happened in RDOF, does the IBO have a plan for those? So just like we'll be doing deduplication in between the rounds of subgrantee selection, if for some reason there is an enforceable commitment that becomes de-obligated for any reason, that is actually an address, assuming that, you know, we didn't have any other mitigating factors like a challenge against it or something like that. That's actually an address we could add back in to the eligible address list. If that happens kind of mid subgrantee selection process before the next round, we could add it back in. So good question. But with that, we are right at